Hey guys, it's Duncan. Hey, I'm going to be doing a series of videos on beer ingredients and how they affect the flavor and the color and whatnot of beer. I'm going to be doing malt today, and I'll eventually do a video on hops and a video on yeast. So malt. Malt is essentially a germinated grain is what it is. So when a farmer grows grain for brewing, they grow it, they harvest it. They usually will dry it to keep it from going bad. And then they give it to a person called the maltster. And now each kernel is a matrix of really complex carbohydrates. It's basically the brewer can't do anything with, because if you try to get the yeast to ferment really complex carbohydrates, it doesn't work, essentially. And if you can think of carbohydrates sort of on a spectrum. So on this end, you have very complex carbohydrates like baking flour. And then on the other side, you have very simple sugar, table sugar, sucrose and the like. So what the maltster does, he steeps the grain in water, and then he puts in these special drums or containers, and each kernel begins to germinate just like a seed would in the ground. When you put a seed in the ground, you water it, it takes in that moisture, it respirates, and it uses that store of carbohydrates to grow into a plant. And essentially, malting is just a controlled germination process. So during the malting process, that germination process, that starch gets broken down to about halfway. The malting process itself can't break it all the way down to simple sugars. So once that has happened and they're satisfied with that, they'll dry it. They'll put it in something very much like a clothes dryer. And depending on how long or how hot they do, that'll kind of determine the color and flavor of a particular malt. Now, your darker malts, like your black malts, your chocolate malts, brown malts, and your caramel malts, those kind of sweetened caramelly malts, those are usually dried in a drum roaster at much higher temperatures to get those colors and those flavors. So I thought I'd talk about, kind of go from lightest to darkest, talking about the flavors, and maybe try to peg some of our beers in those areas. So generally, the lightest color of malt is Pilsner malt, and again, it was made for making Pilsner, pale golden lager. So it is probably kilned the least, or dried rather the least, and for the the smallest time generally, to get a very, very pale beer is what they're kind of going for. So you're definitely going to get a lot of malt character there, some maybe crackery biscuit, but pretty light generally. Again, and that's considering you're using only that. So for example, our gold has mostly North or European Pilsner malt. There's a little bit of wheat malt, and there's some dextrose, some corn sugar in there, which just kind of lightens the body, which will make it even, the impression of that malt character, even lighter, I'd say. Moving on to that is two-row, which is sort of a general catch-all term between sort of Pilsner malt and pale malt, which is the next one. It's usually a blend of a couple different varieties, a little bit darker generally than Pils, but lighter than the next one, which is pale malt. Pale ale malt is obviously made originally for making like English-style pale ales. It's grown and malted all over the world now. So definitely darker than the two-row. You're definitely getting more of a more intense biscuit character in that beer. The ones beyond that, there's mild malt, which really isn't really malted anymore. It was made for making mild ale years ago. A little bit darker. And then your other two kind of famous malts are your Vienna and your Munich malt, which are named after cities where they sort of started making them. They're definitely you're getting a lot more of that toasty, a biscuity kind of character in them. And then you even have dark Munich malts, which are really, really intense. So if you're thinking about like a Munich Dunkel, or some other Oktoberfest beers, usually use a good deal of Munich malt or Vienna malt, or a combination of the two. So yeah, you're definitely getting that rich character. Like in a Dunkel, you're not only getting that toast and that biscuity character, you're also maybe getting some dark fruit character from that, with all those melanoidins, those flavor compounds, like after they've been heated and in a brew kettle, they'll develop some other character in them as well. So, and then your sort of other darker malts that are drum roasted, like I mentioned. Chocolate malt is literally that. It's like a toasty, chocolatey malt. Black malt and roasted barley are definitely like burnt coffee sort of territory, or coffee, character. And your caramalts are interesting, where after the malting process, when anything is dried, like a clothes dryer, you need a vent to get rid of moisture. But when they're roasting, these caramel or crystal malts, they'll actually raise the temperature in the malt to the temperature where that starch conversion happens in the mash tun. So literally, in the kernel, you're having starch conversion from starch to sugar, and then they raise the temperature to caramelize that. And so literally you have this glassy kind of sugar right within the kernel. That's obviously going to impart a lot of caramel character, a good deal of color, and there's all sorts of lighter and darker versions of these caramel or these crystal malts to impart all sorts of color and flavor. And incidentally, with the caramel or crystal malts, those sugars that are created from this process are known as dextrins. They're really not fermentable by the yeast, and they're not so much left behind as sweetness, but as body. They literally build up a body of a beer that make it seem richer and thicker. The viscosity, the sort of the thickness of the beer can the impression of that is bigger with those dextrins from those crystal malts. So for example, our Steelhead Red has pale malt, but also has a good 2 different colors of crystal malt, a little bit of chocolate malt to give it that sort of amber color, and that crystal malt is the real sort of star of that show, I would say. Another example, like I said, our Munich Dunkel. It's made from a combination of Munich and dark Munich malt, so it's got this nice deep amber, light brownish sort of color, but it has this really intense malt character, the toast, the dark fruit character in there as well. So again, all these kind of come together to affect the flavor of the beer. Anyway, that's it. This video's probably gone on long enough. I may do another video about malt, but I just want to kind of hit that. And I'll talk to you later. Bye.